Hi, I'm Bhairavv, and for this season of ArtSparks, I was asked to pick 8 objects from the Mac collection, and so here I am at the museum.
And I'm Shilpa. Welcome to ArtSparks. Today we are looking at this really intricate textile piece that Bhairavv has chosen for us.
So I actually know what this textile is because I've been doing activities about this and learning about this at school.
Okay, so what can you tell us about it?
Well, I know it's kalamkari.
Right.
That's the style of textile.
That's right.
And what kalamkari is, well, it's broken into 2 parts, I guess. There's kalam and there's kari.
Right.
Of course, you know this, but still. It basically means that it's work done by a pen, and since kalam is pen, kari is work.
Right.
And so what they do is they have these pens and they draw intricately with the pen.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. This is kalamkari. And like you pointed out, made with pens that aren't like regular pens that you would use in an ink drawing, but like stuff that's made out of bamboo and cotton and painstakingly hand painted.
Right.
So kalamkari has a very long history in India. There are 2 particular centers called Srikalahasti and Machilapattinam that are the most famous as kalamkari production centers. Kalamkaris have been produced there for centuries.
Right.
They're still primary centers of kalamkari production even today.
I've seen contemporary kalamkari pieces now as well. I've seen in the textile shops that my mother goes to, there's all these bed sheets, kurtas and other clothing stuff, and they're all kalamkari.
Absolutely right. Like these days, kalamkari would be like bit of a fashion trend. It's very, very contemporary. But at the same time, a lot of those kalamkari stuff that's, you know, bed sheets and cushion covers and saris and clothes, dresses and so on, not all of them are produced in the traditional way. Right? So a lot of them these days may just be mass produced in like factories. They're just printed. So they take the same designs. They use a similar color palette. Which is very like typical of kalamkari, but they're not really made by hand. And it's kind of interesting because even with Srikalahasti and Machilapattinam, one of the big differences in the 2 areas or regions is that with Srikalahasti, right, they traditionally used to hand paint almost the entirety of the textile. It was made with like generations of like families who did the craft. Whereas in Machilapattinam, they started sort of doing this hybrid thing where they would do some amount of hand painting and then some amount of block printing.
Right.
So they worked in more these karkhanas, so like workshops, but also a little bit like assembly lines to make production faster, right?
Right. But I mean, still it's quite intricate, right? Intricate, and there's a lot of details in it. So how long does it usually take for a kalamkari work like this or any other kalamkari work to be manufactured or made?
It would still take a fair amount of time, even with the block printing speeding things up as opposed to like painting everything. There are lots of processes involved in making a kalamkari, and they use a bunch of different ingredients at various stages. It's actually a process called mordant resist dyeing. Mordants are basically these metallic salts, kind of like, so you could use iron, for example, and they use natural dyes, right? So it only colors certain parts and then not certain parts. But there are many steps. So like there are washes, then you apply the mordant, then you do the drawing, then you do the dyeing, then you do other washes. So it keeps, like there are cycles, right? It takes time. And that's like a really, that's a really cool part about a handmade textile. But I have a quick question for you since we're talking about this.
Okay.
Can you guess how you could tell a traditionally like made kalamkari that has taken all of these steps and something that might have just been printed?
Not sure.
What they say is that you should try and sniff the kalamkari.
Sniff it.
Because the original kalamkari, they use a bunch of ingredients. Some of them are quite quirky, including buffalo milk. So if you smell the kalamkari and it smells like buffalo milk, then you know that it's a true original.
I'd like to know what this one would be actually used for, because by the size of it, I can think of it being used like for like a small table maybe. And when I first saw it on the site, I was thinking it could be a bit more larger than this. So maybe like on the floor, like for like a big palace or something.
Okay.
Or maybe like a wall draping, just something that they'd hang on the wall. But I mean, it's definitely smaller.
Than you imagined.
Yeah.
But it's interesting that you said maybe on the floor of a palace. Like, why did you think of a palace?
Because I mean, it's so intricate, and this thing looks kind of like the entrance to a palace, maybe.
Right, so the like architectural form.
Yes.
Okay.
So maybe like if you walked into a palace and you saw this large carpet looking like this on the floor, it would look majestic.
Yeah, it would be quite imposing, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so there are some clues in the object itself that can tell us what it might have been used for. So apart from the architecture that you've pointed out, what else do you see?
Well, of course, I see this. I guess that would be like an Islamic inscription that you'd see maybe in mosques, perhaps.
Right, very much so. That is Arabic. And now that you've mentioned a mosque, right? Can you imagine this architectural form also fitting into that interpretation?
I think so. Yes. That's what like I said as like the gateway to a palace. So mosques are also designed in similar ways.
Sure.
Like you can think of these being like the things on top of a mosque.
Yeah, the
And
domes.
this being like the archway to the entry to the mosque.
So this archway that you're talking about, right? Have you seen this particular shape elsewhere?
In mosques, but I can't exactly place what except just like an entrance.
Okay. So this is actually known as a Bhairavv. So in a mosque, in fact, you will find these niches in the walls in this particular shape. And in a mosque, it also actually directs you towards Mecca.
Okay.
When you pray and when you do namaz, you always do it facing Mecca. And this is wherever in the world you are, it's kind of part of the religious belief, right? So you orient yourself such that you're facing towards Mecca.
Okay. So, is this a prayer mat?
Yes, that's a obvious deduction that we have now arrived at, right? But yes, this is a prayer mat, and the idea with this, like you said, it's likely to be some sort of salutation to Allah, some kind of prayer, some kind of scriptural verse, and you would see. I don't know. Have you ever seen a prayer mat that's this intricate or made in this style?
I haven't seen many prayer mats in my life, but they might look somewhat similar to this, maybe.
Okay. So when you look at prayer mats that have the text, if you ever see any, right, they'll always be on the upper portion. So it kind of actually, again, it gives you another orientation. So this mihrab is supposed to, A, you know that it's facing this way, the way you pray, and B, your head should be going on the side where the text is. Because the idea is that is like the upper portion, and therefore that's kind of indicative of closer to heaven and therefore closer to Allah. And so it's seen as different from the world, the earth.
One thing, when I was learning about architecture in my school, in different cultures, I learned that in Islamic architecture, there were no humans or animals allowed, and usually it was restricted to patterns and floral designs.
Right.
But only now I noticed there's 2 peacocks over here.
Yeah, that's a great observation. So they're kind of like hidden, amongst all of that viney, florally stuff there.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're right. It's true that Islam kind of frowns upon depictions of like creatures, and that it's an iconoclastic religion, so there is a preference for geometrical motifs. The calligraphy, for example, because it's the word of God, you get a lot of prominence to that. But at the same time, in more secular areas, you would see a lot more like of human figures as well and animals as well. Things like, if you think of stuff like Mughal miniature paintings, right, for example. But this is a particularly cool thing because it is a prayer mat, right? So it also has religious significance. Yeah. And yet you do have the peacocks. And it's rare, but it's also not like completely like an exception, like not a one single unique thing, because there are a lot of traditions where globally there are communities where people would make their own prayer mats, right? It was also an act of making your prayer mat that was considered in itself a holy project to engage upon. And therefore, they would kind of like include stuff around them, including animals and things. So it's not like never seen before,
Right.
but it is quite rare. So that's a really good observation to have made.
Okay, there's another thing I noticed over here. So to me it looks like this cloth and there's like the border, right? To me it looks as though they're two different cloths.
Yep, you have a keen eye. So, in fact, if you look really closely, you can see like minute stitches.
Yeah.
And like you can also, if you just imagine it, right, how it would feel to touch these two cloths. The one that you're pointing out at the very end of it does look different in texture as well. Right?
Yes.
So when we sort of turn it over, you can see that actually there's a base cloth. This is the stuff, the little bit of the border that you can see. But also this part, right, very interestingly, is also decorated. So you see that it has the same sort of like lined design. So you can see that.
But I can see that over here, these designs, some of them are like smudged and some of them, they're not exactly the same as the others. Like here, this is pointed, but here that one is just blunt.
Right.
So I presume, and over here I can see that it's very well detailed. It's like a bedsheet cover. So to me it looks as though this is like the hand painted, hand drawn, proper kalamkari side proper, and this one is the kalamkari but printed.
So this one would still, I mean, it would be maybe block printed. These days, the ones you get would be like screen printed, right?
Yeah,
so
yeah.
they actually have like no manual labor involved to that degree. But yeah, and sometimes you can see even with block printing, the colors, right? Like here, the way this particular flower comes and this particular flower comes, like you said, it's like fixed because you're stamping. Whereas here, if you look,
It's not that.
yeah, it's you know, it can be like just minute differences.
Yes.
But at the same time, it's kind of amazing to think about
Yes.
like how identical it is, right? Like if you look at these,
They all look similar.
yeah.
So these designs, I remember not only seeing these in textiles in India, but also in like the world and everywhere else. So I know that it's quite popular right now, kalamkari, but it's mainly manufactured in, you've just mentioned two sites right now, right? Mainly.
Right.
So how did kalamkari become so popular?
So the two sites that I mentioned, they're major seaports, right? They're on the coast, and they have been big trade centers since like the 13th, 14th centuries. And textiles in general, as well as dyeing, were major exports for India from back then. So you would have all kinds of textiles that were exported both from this side of the coast, where these two were some of the bigger centers, ports, but also from Gujarat and that side, where other textiles, for example, had like global trade circuits.
It's cool how I knew this was fairly popular, but I never knew that this was like and has always been a viral global trend.
Yeah.
Like everywhere. It's quite cool.
Check out the MAP website to see more of the amazing kalamkaris in our collection.
Curious about what else I picked from the MAP collection? Subscribe to the MAP YouTube channel and check out the other episodes of the series.
Also, don't forget to follow us on our social media handles so that you can stay updated on everything that MAP does.
Thanks for watching. See you next time.
Bye.